Welcome back to another explainer in our series, Decode Healthcare with Harshal. I'm so excited to have you here today. So in part 13, we navigated the critical differences between the C and C also conventions in the alphabetic index, right? We figured out exactly when to follow those little navigational breadcrumbs. But today, today we're leveling up. We're going to master two hidden safety nets in the ICD-10 CM official rulebook, the code also instructions and default codes.
Let me ask you something. Are you leaving crucial secondary diagnoses off your claims? Or even worse, are you sequencing them incorrectly and risking major compliance audits? Because ignoring these specific guidelines is exactly how that happens. You see, these two conventions are often totally misunderstood or just completely overlooked. And when that happens, you really aren't painting the full clinical picture of your patient's encounter. But don't worry, we're here to fix that today.
Here's our quick roadmap for today's explainer. We'll be hitting 1. Decoding code also notes. 2. The freedom of sequencing. 3. Understanding default codes. And 4. The compliance pitfall.
All right, let's dive into Section 1, Decoding Code Also Notes, straight from Section IA 17 of the CMS Guidelines.
Now, whenever you're navigating the tabular list, you've probably seen these instructional notes pop up. But what do they actually legally require you to do? Well, the CMS official guidelines state, and I quote, "A code also note instructs that two codes may be required to fully describe a condition, but this note does not provide sequencing direction." Notice the emphasis on may be required and that explicit statement about sequencing. The codebook is basically tapping you on the shoulder. It's alerting you that a second code might be needed to tell the whole story, but it's definitely not forcing your hand on which one comes first. So here is the absolute crucial takeaway. Two codes are often needed, but you get to choose the sequencing order. Unlike some of the more rigid coding rules, code also gives you, the coder, total sequencing freedom based entirely on the circumstances of the encounter. You really have to evaluate the medical record here. Why is the patient actually here today? What condition is chiefly responsible for the specific admission? Your primary diagnosis is chosen based on what genuinely caused the encounter or what the main treatment focus is for that specific day.
Just look at the distinct difference in our comparison here. On the top, we've got the etiology and manifestation convention. Think of notes like code first or use additional code. That is a strict order. The underlying condition absolutely must go first, followed by the manifestation. No exceptions. But on the bottom, with code also, you have discretionary order. If a patient comes in with two conditions linked by a code also note, you look at the chart. If condition A is the main reason they're being treated today, boom, condition A is sequenced first. If condition B is the focus tomorrow, well then condition B goes first. You have the freedom, but you really have to use your clinical coding judgment. Moving right along to Section 2, Understanding Default Codes, which is Section I.A.18 of the CMS Guidelines. You can think of a default code kind of like a software fallback. You know, when a program doesn't get specific input from a user, it just reverts to its default setting so it doesn't crash. Medical coding works the exact same way when a provider's documentation is lacking detail. The guidelines state, a code listed next to a main term in the ICD-10 CM alphabetic index is referred to as a default code. That lone code just sitting right next to the main term, it isn't there by accident. It's your built-in safety net for when the doctor provides zero extra clinical descriptors in their notes. According to the official CMS guidelines, that default code represents one of two things. First, it might represent the condition that's most commonly associated with that main term. Or second, it might simply be the unspecified code for that condition. Look, the creators of the ICD-10 CM know that sometimes a physician will just jot down a broad disease name without giving you the anatomical site or the severity or the chronicity. So the default code exists just so you don't hit a complete dead end. Let's anchor this with a very specific example provided right in the CMS guidelines themselves. Imagine your provider writes down a diagnosis of appendicitis in the medical record. That's it. Just appendicitis, no additional info like acute or chronic. Because the documentation is completely unspecified, the default code listed directly next to the main term appendicitis in the alphabetic index becomes your automatic choice. You just assign it and you move on. So let's walk through the exact three-step mental workflow that every elite coder uses here. Step 1, you rigorously check the medical documentation for any additional clinical info. You are scouring that chart for words like acute, chronic, left, right, primary, secondary. Step 2, if literally none of that detail exists, you track straight to the main term in the alphabetic index. You completely ignore all those highly specific indented subterms because, well, your doctor didn't give you the data to use them. And step 3, you just assign the default code sitting right next to that main term. It's highly efficient and it's perfectly compliant, but only under the right circumstances.
That brings us to Section 3, the compliance pitfall, default codes versus specificity.
Now, while default codes are an absolutely amazing tool, they sit right on the boundary of a massive audit risk. Misusing these flexible rules can cost your facility dearly. So here's your audit warning. Default codes are a legal backup. They are not an excuse to be lazy and skip specific clinical details that are actually present in the patient's chart. If you get into the habit of just grabbing the default unspecified code because, hey, it's the fastest thing to do, an auditor is going to come in, open that electronic health record, and find that the provider actually did document acute purulent appendicitis 3 paragraphs down in the surgical notes. If the specificity is there in the record, you absolutely must use the specific subterms in the index. You only use the default if the documentation genuinely offers no further details. Accuracy and specificity will always win.
So, are you ready to master the ultimate boundary between a doctor's medical opinion and the coder's rulebook? Well, that wraps up our breakdown of code also notes and default codes. As always, I really hope this explainer has empowered you to code with more competence and absolute precision. If you found this valuable, please make sure to subscribe, hit that like button, and drop a comment below on how you handle unspecified documentation in your own daily workflow. And get ready, because in Part 15, we're tackling Section IA-19, Code Assignment and Clinical Criteria. We're going to be defining that exact boundary line between a doctor's medical opinion and our rulebook. You definitely won't want to miss it. Keep learning, keep decoding, and I'll see you in the next explainer.